Welcome to Power Your Life Today. I'm Kristy Jo, Mind and Body Strategist. And today you are listening to part 6 of the Suicide Survivor series. Now, this is going to be an interesting episode because we are not actually interviewing a survivor today. I have my mom here with me who is going to help me tell the story of my oldest brother who ended up taking his life as at the culmination of some events. You've heard me mention this if you've been listening to this series. Many people have wondered what the full story is. Those who are close to our family, those who don't know us but are still curious. And so through this episode, we are wanting to share at least our perspectives, realizing there's so many perspectives out there, and simply offer maybe some insight, a little more understanding, and some compassion, just furthering our exploration of this topic that we believe needs to be talked about more openly. So thank you, Mom, for being here with me today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Now, before we started recording, you were mentioning what your hopes were as people are listening to this.
Well, as I've listened to some of the other episodes and again thinking about things, I just came to the realization, I guess, that nobody's story is the same.
Yeah.
And so my telling my experience with Denzel's death is different than yours, different than Dad's, and other people, other families that have had a child in their life. I can't say, oh, this is what you have gone through. No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Every single person's experience is unique. In fact, I saw a quote that said, "You're unique, just like everyone else."
Isn't that the truth?
It is. And so every story is different, but there may be some similarities, or what I hope, that I can share things that somebody can say, oh, I didn't think of that. And that can help me deal with the stuff I'm dealing with. And so just everybody gets to pick and choose what they learn from.
Right.
And I think sharing our story, our experience, may be beneficial to other people.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. So let's start. Why don't you give us a brief background of Denzel's life so we kind of understand who he is, what he did. He was your firstborn son.
Okay, so Denzel was the firstborn, which was a good thing. He and I often laughed about, Denz, it's a good thing you were born first because you were tough enough to knock off the rough edges off of your mother that maybe the other kids couldn't have.
Thanks, Denz.
Oh, holy smokes. That does not mean it was easy. We did take some rough knocks. I learned a lot from Denzel, from being his mom, for which I'll always be grateful. There were times that I asked him, and he felt bad that he did not have an older sibling. But somebody has to be the oldest child, you know, and so Denz was it. Wow, do the nutshell. Probably the nutshell was he was a hands-on learner. He learned by doing. He did not learn by observing other people's consequences. Luckily, most of our children after Denzel were observer learners, and they didn't have to do the hands-on thing. They're going, oh man, don't do what Denzel did.
He blazed the way. We could see, do this, get this reaction from parents. Oh, maybe I'll avoid that.
Don't do that. We could do a whole other podcast on Denzel's life.
We could.
But we won't here. But I think the short overview is that Denzel was in the military. He was in the National Guard and the Triple Deuce, the 222nd.
How old was he when he enlisted? It was pretty.
18.
Yeah, he was young.
Yeah, because he came home and said, so Mom and Dad, I was sitting on the front room floor. What do you think if I joined the National Guard? And I wanted to say, which I didn't say, why are you asking our opinion? You've never cared about it before. But I was not enthusiastic about it. But again, I knew that it was his life. He got to decide, and he chose to join the National Guard. And he did 2 tours in Iraq. He did a few other deployments that kept him stateside. And I guess the irritation that I had with the military was You can say, get your education with the military. They don't tell you it takes 15 years because they interrupt here and there. And the deployments would stop him mid-semester. Sure, they gave the tuition back, but they didn't give his life back.
Yeah.
And so, but that's a sidelight. There were things that I was not happy with the military side of Denzel's life. But welcome to mortality.
Yeah.
Each child gets to make their choices, and our job is to love and support. And I hope I did that. One of the sweet times, the first homecoming from Iraq, when he got off the plane in Cedar. Were you there?
I don't
Do you
think
remember? I know some of the kids were there. But the sweetest thing was him coming off the airplane and just wrapping me in his arms and saying, I love you, Mom, and him being smoke-free. He had had a problem smoking, and I was sensitive to it, but again, he got to make his choices, and it made my heart happy. It made it happy to see him and to smell him smoke-free. Maybe they weren't allowed to smoke on the plane.
Yeah, who knows?
But anyway, and we had a very open communication from that first tour in Iraq. There were many, many difficult things that he experienced that he would call and talk to me about or email me about. And before he left on the second tour to Iraq, when they were shutting down, I had told him, Denz, I really want to write a book about your experiences, but I'm really worried that I won't get it right. And he says, Mom, it's your book. Go ahead and write it. I said, really? He says, yes. Well, and so I have that approval. I still need to do it.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just a little, when he came back from Iraq the second time he flew into Salt Lake, Dad and I were down here. It was right towards the end of December, well, the end of the school year in December, and we couldn't leave in the middle of the week, and so we didn't go up. And so I felt badly about that. And then we had did we have our Valentine's dinner in
February 2012.
Yep. And so we had the Valentine's dinner. We all went up to Salt Lake, since that's where a lot of the people were. And so that was really good. And then he had some severe issues with a knee injury.
So let's fast forward, because we talked about he enlisted at 18. So we're talking how many years later?
Okay.
He's done how many tours over in Iraq?
He's done 2 tours in Iraq. He's done one in Washington State. He did one in Salt Lake for the Olympics. One down in, so 5 tours.
Yeah, and he had advanced in ranks. So now we're talking, how old was he?
31.
31.
And he was just applying for his lieutenant commission. He had dealt with, off and on, substance abuse. He had an alcohol addiction. He had a prescription pain med addiction. And so when he had knee surgery in March, right about the same time that Dallin did. Dallin had his knee injury in rugby.
Who's the youngest boy?
So the oldest and the youngest have knee surgery at the same time. But Denzel was married. And so I felt like I was more needed in Provo with Dallin to take care of him.
Then Salt Lake with Denzel.
Right, who had a
Which,
wife.
for those who aren't from Utah, that's about 45 minutes apart.
Yeah. And then where I live in St. George is 4 hours from Provo, and roughly 5 to Salt Lake. Anyway, so a lot of things culminated. And, I don't want to get into all the details of this. It just, things added up. There were things from being in Iraq. There were some very difficult things. I could talk about PTSD. But it was the combination of everything. Some difficulties in his relationship, in his marriage. Just lots of different things.
Yeah.
So, shall we just go right down to the details of what happened?
So April 2012.
April 29th.
Okay.
It was a Sunday. Dad and I and Dallin and Natalie, a few of the kids were here. We had gone to a church meeting, a late in the evening. It was a bunch of choir singing. It was really a fun evening. We got home. The kids went to go spend time with their friends. So Dad went to get his pajamas on, and I turned the news on. I thought, oh, we haven't watched the news in so long. Turn the news on, and it says, breaking news, SWAT team standoff, Riverton, 31-year-old male. And I instantly thought, Denzel lives in Riverton. He's 31. And then it said ex-military. And I went, oh, Denzel's not ex-military, he's military. And then the Holy Ghost, this prompting inside, said, go check the internet. So I went in on the computer, pulled up KSL News, and there was Denzel's address. And I guess the best description is it's like you just see the dominoes start to fall. Just boom, 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 boom. I walked quickly into our room. Dad was in the bathroom, so I knocked on the door and said, Rod, we have a problem. Well, that was not the nicest. In hindsight, I wish I would have handled that differently. It was a shock to Dad. I couldn't really say anything. I just motioned, follow me. And Nat had walked in the door, and so I just motioned, come with me, and pointed at the computer for them to read. Because I didn't know any more than I had read. And anyway, and so that's when we started calling all the kids.
Did you call Denzel?
Oh, yeah. So
okay, that's my first question. Did you just text him, call him? What?
No. As soon as I showed them the computer, I started calling and texting.
Okay.
Yes. And I said, Denz, I know that you're in a very difficult spot right now. Please call me. Denz, I love you. And there wasn't any response. And I understand now that the police were probably intercepting everything that was coming through.
Oh.
Yeah.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
Okay. And about what time is this?
This is about 10:30.
At night.
Well,
okay.
because by the time we called all the kids that were local and they all came over was about 11 o'clock. And this still boggles my mind. We have a lovely family room we could have been in. But for some reason, we were in the garage, even though the garage has carpet. And there's that couch in the garage. We were in the garage when we all knelt down to pray. And I don't know if it was just because that's when everybody was there, and so we just hit our knees. And Dad prayed, please bless it, the best possible resolution can be made for Denzel. And I just remember that sticking out in my mind, the best possible resolution for Denzel. And that was at about 11, maybe 11:10, 11:15. And talking with the police later and getting the police report. 11:24 was the last communication they had with Denzel. And I just had, I can't even describe my feelings through the night. Harrison, which was our youngest, Dallon's best friend, came over. I still kick myself that I did not have the presence of mind to tell Julie to come over. Because this was Denzel's other mother, and she should have been here. I called and told her about it and said, please pray for him. But I should have said, come over.
And just because we understand the reference of other mother, we're not saying anything literal here. Just she's a very, very close friend.
My sister by choice, and who we kind of laughed that our kids needed two moms, and she just lives a couple of blocks away. And anyway, but as I told Dad, go ahead and go to bed, because you do not do well without sleep. I will stay awake. And I stayed up all night. I can't even describe it. It's simply, I was a mother on guard, on watch. I am watching. I am not going to go to sleep until everything, I can't describe it. And so I wrote in my journal, and I didn't have any dark feelings. I didn't have any worry feelings. I felt at peace. And I don't ever remember thinking about what if Denzel ends his life. I just can't even describe the feeling other than I think I knew the outcome in my heart, and I just needed to be there, be on guard. It was really strange. And so and then all the other kids that were here were sleeping in the front room on the couches and on the floor. And so it was about 5 o'clock that Dad got up and came in. Have you heard anything? And I said, no. And I had called Unified Police because a friend who's on the police force in St. George had said, I'd called him immediately. He says, this is who you call. And so I had called them the night before, that night, and talked to them to give them any information that I could, any assessment, any details to Denzel. Anyway, so I called them back just after Dad and I talked. And it was very strange. The gal that answered, she says, well, the lieutenant is busy for a few minutes. He'll call you back in about 15 minutes. Well, in hindsight, I go, I can tell you what was going on exactly. She's motioning to whoever's there. It's the mother. Tell her, we'll call her in 15 minutes. Well, in 15 minutes, the St. George police pulled up at our house. And I found out more details after the fact from Amelia, who was what I thought. Amelia and Natalie both were asleep on the couch. Found out a year and a half later, no, they weren't asleep. They heard the police car pull up. They heard the boots walking up our cement walkway. And they knew long before the doorbell rang. But the doorbell rang, and so I came through, stepping over sleeping bodies, and I answered the door. And when I opened the door, the first thing I said was, I don't want to be talking to you two right about now, do I? Because I had played through my mind a scenario from the times Denzel was in Iraq. What would I do if he was killed in Iraq and 2 officers showed up at my door? How would I handle it in the morning, in the night, if Rod was here, if he wasn't here? I had already role-played. And so it just kind of came out. And the look on the officer's faces, I just went, oh, I am so sorry. Come in.
He's like, I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah. And I said, just step over, everybody. We'll go in the back. I took him into the piano room where I teach piano lessons. And as we walked back there, again, I did not understand. There's a script. As we walked back, I said, so, is our son dead? And there's silence. And I said, just tell me, is our son dead? And they said, Mr. and Mrs. Hunt, we're sorry to inform you that, and they didn't read, but said the script, that your son, Roderick Denzel Hunt, was found dead, And then he said, I am so sorry. This is the worst possible scenario. And without even thinking, I just said, no, it's not. And again, that looked like, who is this woman? And I said, no, the worst possible scenario would be if he ended someone else's life.
Yeah.
I can deal with my grief. I cannot fix another mother's grief caused by my son. And so that was the first of many things I was grateful for. I mean, you can sit and go, oh my gosh, my son is dead. Or you can say, oh my gosh, I am so grateful that this is all that happened. I was grateful to Denzel for only ending his life. He could have ended others' lives. And I will be forever grateful that he did not.
Yeah.
I can deal with my grief. That's plenty. Okay, so your perspective.
Yeah. So
because you were not here.
No, I was living in Salt Lake, and in fact, because he'd had his surgery, I was the closest living sibling at that time, and he and I talked on the phone about once a week at that time, just fun and check in, hear little things there. And I had the feeling to go visit him about 1 to 2 weeks before this happened. And I have always just been a really busy person. I don't know why. Why is that? And I remember feeling like, oh, this just isn't important. It's a 30-minute drive to go down to Riverton. I was living about in Mill Creek area of Salt Lake. And I mean, he's just on the couch. We'll just hang out. Like, what? I could be doing so many other things, but I went. And it was so fun. And yeah, he was on his couch and we watched American Idol and we goofed and ate Starburst. And that was when, well, actually I didn't eat the Starburst, and this is why, because I was 3 weeks in to my body transformation, for those of you who've listened to my Body Buddies podcast. And I told him about my desire to compete in competitions and to master my body for the first time. He was the one that introduced me to lifting at the age of 18. He knew a lot of the psychological issues I faced with my diet and the binge eating and resulting starvation, or spending so much time in exercise trying to burn off those calories. And I'll never forget what he told me, because I was worried, coming from this conservative family, what my family would think. And he told me, he said, Kristy, you have to start being your own person. You have to stop worrying what people think. He said, if this is what you want to do, I want you to do it. And I know you can do it. And that honestly was what got me through the rest of my transformation, where a lot of people probably would have broke on this very rigid plan. I was eating my chicken and my broccoli at his funeral. I never broke diet once because of what he had told me. And I knew he was there watching as I continued moving forward. So a little digression there, but moving back. So I was so grateful I had that last contact with him. So during this body transformation time, I went to bed at 10 o'clock every single night, turned off my phone, because I knew how important my sleep was for me to get up at 4:45 in the morning and go train, be at the gym at 5. I trained from 5 to 6:30, went home and prepared my food, and then went to work all day. So my phone was off. When I woke up at 4:45 and turned my phone on, I had multiple voicemails, text messages, and they all basically said, call us as soon as you're awake, call us. Nothing, no other details. And then I turned on the phone. I texted you because I didn't want to call. I mean, we're early risers, but still, I was like, well, it sounds like they were up late. I don't know what's going on. So I texted saying, can I call? While I was waiting for a response, I logged into my email, which was just a habit, check my email real quick. And Dad had sent me the KSL article. So I quickly read that. I knew what had happened by the time you called me. And that's when I had grabbed my gym bag, my keys, and I told you, I'm going down there. And you firmly told me, no, do not go. And I remember feeling so defiant, like, no, I'm going to go. In my mind, I'm picturing, okay, he's in a situation. I'm going to go. I'm going to be there with him. I don't care what's going on. I'll talk him through it. He knows how much, we love him and whatever. We'll get him through this. And you said, do not go. And that tone in your voice, I was not going to argue with at that point. I knew you knew more than I did. And you told me, go to the gym, turn on the news, keep your phone on you. So I wonder at what point in, the story of times and everything this was and everything. But I drove to the gym, and I do remember dropping to my knees before I left and just praying, help him be of sound mind. Help him make the right choice. I didn't pray for what I wanted, because I was very aware of some of the pain, emotional, physical, mental, that he had dealt with. We were close. And so I remember wanting what was best, that he would be able to make the best choice. I didn't even think about him taking his life. I really didn't. No. So I get to the gym, I get on the treadmill, turn on the news, and less than 1 minute in, it comes back from a commercial. And this is the part that's haunted me, is because I had to listen to the KSL reporter say, back to our breaking news in Riverton, the standoff has been called off, and it's unfortunately ended with the suspect taking his life. And I about fell off that treadmill. I grabbed my keys, grabbed my phone, sprinted back out of there thinking, I don't care what anybody thinks, I know I just got here. They have no idea what's going on. And as soon as I'm outside, I called home first. No, I called Brandon. I called Brandon, my next oldest brother, who lives 45 minutes north. And I said, is it true? Is it true? I just heard on the news. And his voice cracked and he said, sis, I think it is. And I said, I'm coming to your house. He said, okay, I'll see you soon. And then I called home. And Amelia answered the phone. Or was it Natalie? It was one of the girls. And I said, is it true? Have you guys heard? Are you watching the news? She said, Kristy, we turned off the news a long time ago. I said, the news just said. And I didn't say what. And she said, Kristy, the cops just got here. And my heart just sunk. Because at this point I realized this is it. This is how it's ended. And I remember driving up north. I remember the very shaky text. How are you supposed to tell your boss you're not coming into work because your brother's gone? And I remember how compassionate and understanding he was that whole week. I mean, he gave me all the time I needed, and I'll always appreciate that. And then our family coming together. You guys drove north, and same day, right?
Yeah, a couple of hours, well, not even that. After the police left, we called Julie. She immediately came over. And this is your weird mom. Even in this very emotional, difficult time, I knew it was vitally important. I got my phone and took pictures of all of us in the front room, devastated, in our pajamas, hugging and crying. And I mean, not a lot, but it was a very poignant time. This was a huge thing for our family.
Yeah.
And then Dad had called our bishop, who was, I think, in Hawaii.
Oh.
And it was interesting. Dad and I've talked about this a few different times. So his counselors came over. The people that came that happened to be here were the people who were supposed to be here. Chris White had been in the military, was very close to Denzel. He was the one who officiated at the funeral. He understood the military better than anybody else that was here. And it was an honor to him to be here. Anyway, they gave us blessings to help us. And then shortly after that, and each of the kids received a blessing. Dad helped give blessings. And then we just packed up and headed north. After we spent some time with Anna, Denzel's wife, I just felt like we needed to be with the kids. And so we left Anna, who was having it was a difficult time for her. And we all met
At Brandon's.
Was it at Linda's? Because I know we were at Linda's at part of the time.
We met at Brandon's first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just think about our family when there is something very difficult like this. The only thing we wanted was to be together.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I felt really badly about was Jamie.
Yeah.
The second oldest child was in Texas, and some very difficult financial circumstances. And, her first thought was, come. And I said the same thing to her. No, until we know. And so it was very difficult for her to process alone.
Yeah, without the family.
Yeah. And that was difficult. And, having to do it over, I'd probably do it differently. But anyway.
Well, I think what would be interesting kind of bringing this home because, that's the story. So there's a lot of the details of what happened, how it impacted us at that point. But what we began to do to process, I think, is where the real, maybe translatable information to our listeners might be. There's a few things that really come to my mind in some things that I have found very valuable that we did and continue to do. Which the first thing was our family all knelt and prayed together, after the event. And having that chance to unite in our beliefs, and it was power.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people have like two decisions in a tragic event. You can choose to blame, or you can choose to think. And to find the things that you've been blessed with, even in this tragic situation, is very, very powerful. One of the things that was vitally important, it's always been when you were a baby, that's when we first learned about the importance of forgiveness. And one of the phone calls that I made when we were up at Brandon's was to Jan Graff, who is the stress management guy that has helped us.
So many of the topics and things you've heard me say on previous episodes probably could trace back to things Jan has taught us.
Yeah. Now, Jan is a man, Jan Graff, and he does Graff stress management. But so I called him, who was with a client, and so his wife answered the phone, and the first thing she said was, "Oh, Patrice, I have been so worried about you. How are you?" And we talked, and I shared some of my feelings, and she says, "Well, you need to forgive." And I said, "I know, I forgive." And I was very general. I forgive everyone for everything. And she says very gently, "No, you need to be a lot more specific." And I said, "I know, I'll work on it." And so as Dad and I drove to my parents' house to tell them, about 15 minutes away, Dad and I just, every single thing we could think of. I forgive Denzel for ending his life. Well, that's a no-brainer. I forgive Denzel for having substance abuse. I forgive Denzel for, and we were very specific.
Anything that came to mind.
Absolutely. I forgive myself for being angry. I forgive myself for being hurt. I forgive myself for being mad. I forgive myself for being resentful. And you might think, well, aren't those all the same thing? No, they're different. And even if they are the same thing, if it comes to mind, and the importance of saying it out loud, I forgive. I forgive. And you don't have to feel this in your heart. It comes as you say it out loud, and it is vitally, vitally important. Yeah. There's a whole lot more details on that we could give, but some is kind of personal.
Sure. Well, and I think because it's all energy shifting of how then what emotion are we going to carry forward. Now we're recording this 5 years after this has happened, and we're able to do this. I know many people are surprised that we can't even talk about it to the extent that we do, and it's due to a lot of these processing techniques that we use. Another thing I wanted to point out was when all of us were together at Brandon's, and I remember we were just sitting on the couches. We also went for a walk as a family, and we just needed to process and spend that time together. But something that's always been important in our family that you and Dad have instilled in us, which I know all of us kids are grateful for, is the power of touch. And I remember just holding hands with different siblings, sitting on the couch, just touching.
Being right next to each other.
And I think that that's a very powerful tool from human to human with no words needed.
Right.
Just having that extra little energy, that extra love, that extra empathy. And so I don't know if a family didn't have that before, that would have been able to be used, but because that was something in our family, we often give each other massages or foot massages. That's just a very real part of our family.
Touch is vital.
And I think that has a great power to help you feel you're not alone.
Well, and I think, again, from a military aspect, yeah, bring those tissues over here. From a military aspect, I picture this garrison of soldiers going into battle, maybe in the olden days. And if they're all spread out, 200 yards, maybe that's effective tactics. But can you imagine the power and the strength? If you're going into battle shoulder to shoulder, the strength that comes from that touch, that close proximity. And I think, just like you said, there is just such strength that has come to our family without one single word, although we do talk a lot.
Yeah, we do.
Just how important touch is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good. Now, I have to tell you, because I think you know this, but as Dad and I were driving from my parents' house down to the mortuary in Salt Lake, so we had about a half-hour drive, all of a sudden, Dad's driving, and I turned to him and with great intensity said, I flatly refuse to give the adversary any more power than he's already got. He may get to determine some of the things that happen in my life, but he does not get to choose how I deal with it. I will not allow him to make me unhappy. I choose to be happy. And it was interesting because I had thought it, but as I said it to Dad, it reinforced. So again, the importance of saying it out loud, and the importance of not saying bad things out loud.
Right. Yeah. Because again, it's whatever we verbalize or vocalize on that energy frequency, those vibrations within ourselves or spirit, or however we want to refer to that subconscious part of ourselves, it's going to follow. Whatever scripts are inside or we vocalize. It's powerful. Right. Someone told me this week, do you know what the manifestation between your brain and your heart is your voice? That's powerful.
Yeah. Yep. Very good. So again, we've got all kinds of backgrounds, people that are listening. I will just simply say, from my perspective, I know that God is real. I know that. And I also know the adversary is real. And my take on it is, I will never turn my back on the enemy. I will look him in the eyes, and we will have a war, and I know who's going to win, because I know that I'm on God's side, and he will win. Doesn't mean we won't come out battered and bruised. But I just think it is so important to recognize what's really going on. This was a war, a battle with the adversary. Okay, the situation, Denzel ended his life. That is a whole script in itself. That's Denzel's thing. How I choose to let that impact me is mine. And the adversary can take things and spin it around. Oh, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And it would be easy to say, well, if God really loved us, he wouldn't have let this happen. Right. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. Bad things happen. Yeah. Period.
To everyone.
Nobody is immune. Yeah. If you haven't had bad things happen yet, hold on.
Sorry in advance.
Yes. And it's not that our Heavenly Father doesn't love us. He does. He has given us everything we need to deal with the difficult stuff in our life. Now, if we throw it away or if we ignore it, that is our choice. He has given us everything. He has given us his Son. He has given us the atonement. The atonement of Jesus Christ has impact on everything. And that's one of the other things that Dad and I have implemented and reminded you kids. Invoke the atonement of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ paid the price for every single sin, every single mistake, every illness, every disease, everything. And so as sometimes little thoughts will creep into my head, well, what about this? And when I start paying attention, I go, oh, I invoke the atonement. I do not need to carry this weight. The Savior gets to carry it.
Well, and I just had a realization, because so many therapists, I've done a lot of work, and to do this Power Your Life Today podcast, I interview so many people. I feel really blessed to feel like I get therapy all the time. I get a process. It's education on yourself. And so many people who find out about Denzel, they try and dig deeper. They're sometimes trying to get me, they feel like I've hidden or suppressed these feelings about his death. But when you just said that about the atonement of Jesus Christ, it reminded me that from the beginning, I did invoke that power through my prayers. And I think these things are, talking is one thing, but actually taking a concept and having that open mind and heart to, in prayer, ask Heavenly Father in faith, saying, I don't know how this works, but I trust that it does and it can, and I don't have to shoulder this by myself. And there it is. That just clicked for me. That's why I've been able to do what I do. That's why I can talk about it. That's why I've been able to talk with others and be there for others dealing with very difficult situations. That power is not my own.
Exactly. It is the power of Jesus Christ and his atonement. And a lot of times people are either afraid to acknowledge that or hesitant. Maybe they haven't had the experience. And all I can say from my own experience, I have felt it time and time again. And not just with Denzel's death. You have 7 children, you get all kinds of experiences, and you invoke the atonement a lot, because I cannot do it on my own. Yeah. There are so many things that I have not gotten to have say about. Doggone. And as children have made choices that I haven't agreed with, I could be a mess as I worry and fret, and which that's stupid. Worry doesn't get you
wasted
anywhere.
Energy.
Yeah. And so as I invoke the atonement, and I've said, there have been many times I've been in tears, Heavenly Father, I cannot do this. As I see children making choices that I think is going to land them in some very difficult places, but acknowledging their agency to choose. And so how am I supposed to cope with this? Oh, that's right. The Savior has paid the price for everything. He has felt everything. He knows exactly what you're going through. So let him carry this load. And it's simply a lie. I don't know if you remember, but when Natalie got married, and there were some difficult circumstances there, and a few days before the wedding, I was in the crying mode. I can't do this. And at the reception, at one point you came up to me. I don't know if you even remember this. And you said, Mom, you're really happy for Natalie, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. Which I could not have said 5 days earlier. And that's the power of the atonement of Jesus Christ. He will carry the load for you if you let him. So anyway.
I think that's a powerful note to end on. And no matter what the beliefs of our listeners are, I think realizing the power of learning. You're here because you want to learn. You're open-minded. You realize there's more. We of ourselves are incomplete. And so be open. Explore. Test. That's one of the greatest spiritual lessons I've ever learned, is test it. And that is where you find answers. So we encourage you to share this with anybody who you feel it may bless their lives. Please leave a review on the Power Your Life Today podcast. This enables the digital world to gain greater access to this type of information that really is powerful. So the best compliment or feedback we could get is a review. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a Power Your Life Today listener, and make that decision to keep improving your life so that you can live a life of more value, more love, and more service. Power your life today.